On this edition of the Vermont Motorsports Magazine Report, we'll be talking with new Volante Modified Racing Series director Scott Tapley and previewing their 2013 season. We'll also discuss the potential effects of NASCAR's UNOH Battle at the Beach on short track racing. Strap yourself into the 5-point harness because we've got that and much more on the Vermont Motorsports Magazine Report.
Watch it now.
Welcome to the second edition of the Vermont Motorsports Magazine Report. I'm Ricky St. Clair, and joining me are my co-hosts, Vermont Motorsports Magazine Editor TJ Ingerson and founder of VtMotorMag.com, Justin St. Louis. Guys, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Ricky. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, very good. Excited to be back here.
And one of the first things we're going to highlight on today's agenda is the UNOH Battle of the Beach. 3 races at the Daytona International Speedway on Monday and Tuesday. And Monday night, Kyle Larson kicked off the events in the NASCAR Whelen All-American Series Late Model 150. Before I mention that, the 3 race winners led a combined 4 laps. And Larson made contact with C.E. Falk in turns 3 and 4 coming to the checkers. TJ, can you explain to those that didn't see the event what exactly happened?
Well, C.E. Falk saw the winner's paycheck in his eyes and got turned out of turn 4 on the front stretch. About as blatant as you can get, I think, in a turn. And I've never race directed in my life, but I could have made that call within 5 seconds about what should happen to Kyle Larson. And then, not to look too much ahead, but I think it set up the racing for the next night in terms of how it was going to go.
And, when Larson made contact with Falk in turns 3 and 4, were you anticipating a call to be made? I know we'll be asking that later to Volante Modified Racing Series director Scott Tapley, but were you anticipating a call once Falk got turned around?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You were expecting to make a call because it wasn't a bump and run. And I've debated with NASCAR's Jason Chrisley, who runs the marketing department, on Twitter about their bump and runs and how it's not racing. And I kind of played it off in my Jack Stands column about how maybe that's because I grew up around Tom Curley's racing and he doesn't like it. And I mean, anyone who's been at the Tom Curley pit meeting with his model cars knows what he's talking about. How he beats them and bashes them and shows you that's not racing. But that wasn't a bump and run. That was a dump and run. And I know how NASCAR, quote unquote, accepts the bump and run, but again, that wasn't a bump and run. That was a dump and run, and that was a call that could have been made instantaneously. 5 seconds, I could have made that call, and I mean, it was as bad of a call as they come. And like I said, I think it set up the next night's racing.
And Justin, if anything, what are some of the positives that can come out of this?
Well, I would agree with TJ that I was pretty disappointed that there was no call on Kyle Larson or in the modified race when Mike Stefanik got turned, or in the K&N race. Well, it ultimately didn't matter, but when Greg Alding dumped Michael Self on the last lap, and of course Cameron Haley drove by both of them to win. But I think that there's a silver lining to everything, and the fact that short track racing was at Daytona for the first time is a huge, huge positive for short track racing, whether it's NASCAR sanctioned or ACT or dirt car or WISSOTA out in the Midwest or anything over on the West Coast. It doesn't matter. Short track racing is on the map now, at least right now. Mike Stefanik was on Jay Leno. The clip of him being mad on the Speed Channel, that was on Jay Leno. That doesn't really get much more mainstream than that. It probably would have been better if it was on Letterman because he's funnier. But anyway, it's, I don't know how you can get a bigger showcase for short track racing. You remember the Toyota Showdown at Irwindale Speedway out in California? That was great, but it was only on Speed Channel, and really not a whole lot of excitement came out of it. Yeah, there was one year where Joey Logano got the win taken away because he wrecked Peyton Sellers. Mike Olson got disqualified one year. But that was really only it was only in the closed sect of short track fans. They were really the only ones that knew about it, and those inside the NASCAR garages that were watching, because that's where they go to look for new talent. It didn't hit mainstream America like this did, and I think a lot of that is due to social media. A lot of it is due to the buzz that was built up about the Battle at the Beach by not only NASCAR but also Daytona International Speedway as well, and the local media, in and around Florida, the national media. There was a lot going on, and everybody knows about it. What happened? It seems like everybody was talking at some point about Kyle Larson wrecking CE Fault to win that late model race. I mean, these are the same kinds of cars that race at Thunder Road every week, and Devil's Bowl, and White Mountain, and Oxford. I mean, yeah, of course, there's small rule changes. We all know that, but they're the same cars. They're the same kinds of drivers. CE Falk built that car with his family in their garage in Virginia, went down to Daytona, and was 100 yards away from winning the biggest short track race in the world. I mean, how cool is that? I think that whether the races were good or not to watch, 17 yellows in a modified race is awful. We all know that, and nobody was happy with that. But the publicity that modified race got, Mike Stefanik won 9 NASCAR touring championships, 9. And just by saying, just by swearing on live TV, he brought modified racing, NASCAR modified racing, the same kind of cars that run at Loudon and Waterford and Thompson. We see these cars every week. He's on Jay Leno on the Tonight Show. I don't see how that's a bad thing.
The only thing I would worry about is with the mainstream attention that it's getting, is that fans that have never watched a short track race before, that tuned in on Monday and Tuesday night, that watch this, now if they say, oh, let's go to our local short track, that would be the big positive if it's putting butts in the seats. But I think the big negative that could come out of this is that when the fan goes and they don't see the guy wreck coming out of turn 4 running for the race win, or if he does get, or if the winner does get turned, they do penalize second place. Or then you have a guy that goes on and like Mike Stefanik is so emotional and kind of holds his emotions in a way that isn't truly representation, or then becomes a true representation of what really 99% of short tracks are. That's kind of the worry about I get, is that if you watch, say you go to a movie theater and you watch, say a movie and you think, okay, that's great. Maybe I should go check out another movie of that actor or that producer or that director, and you go and you feel disappointed about that second movie you see, because that's more of a true representation of what he does other than this one great movie he put out. And that's kind of where I would worry about, is that the fans that end up going to these short tracks and they're buying the ticket, they're sitting in the seats, then feel cheapened out because they didn't actually get to see what they thought they were going to see because of what happened on Monday and Tuesday night.
Well, I understand your point, TJ, but I'll say that, not everybody is Martin Scorsese. They're not always going to be good movies. And they cost the same for every ticket, no matter if you're seeing the comedy or the Titanic or whatever. We all know that if you want to see smash up, racing and see guys fist fighting and all that stuff, typically, when you go to a short track, the top divisions, you're not going to see that in, because these guys spend the money, they put in the time, they're acting as professionally as they can for the most part, and that's the top tier stuff. If you want to see the smash them and crash them, you're going to look at a mini stock division or an enduro class or a bomber or a Hornet or whatever you want to call it. That's where the action is, and essentially, that's what it's a bigger scale, and it's maybe hard to imagine or hard to want to accept. But in terms of Daytona, the modifieds and the late models and the K&N cars, those are the street stocks and the mini stocks of what's going on during speed weeks at Daytona. Yeah, they're a little bit, these are blue-collar teams and blue-collar racing. And, when we go to a Thunder Road, you look at Phil Scott or Dave Pembroke or Nick Sweet and you think, man, it doesn't get any bigger than this. If you're a little kid that really hasn't been exposed to NASCAR's, top 3 Sprint Cup nationwide truck, you think that, I'm telling you right now, you may not believe it, but it's true. You go to Thunder Road and you get Phil Scott to sign an autograph or whatever, Patrick O'Pearl on a tour race. These are the stars. These are the guys that aren't wrecking each other for the win on the last lap. You watch the street stocks because they're called the Crunch Bunch, and you expect that the guy to wreck somebody on the last lap for the win. And yes, they'll get penalized, and that's where you'll see that. And generally it's across the board that way. But the action and I think the passion that was shown on Speed Channel for that UNOH battle at the beach, that is what is going to reignite people's feelings about short track racing. I think honestly, yeah, it really was a misrepresentation of what happens at over 1,000 racetracks every Friday, Saturday night across the country. But the passion is there. The passion is very real, and I think America wants that. They need it. It's a positive thing. I don't see anything wrong with the overall effect of what happened at Daytona. We're all going to be upset because we're all short track purists and we all want to see good racing, clean racing, hard racing. We want to see guys earn it. And we wish the black flags had been thrown at Daytona. They weren't. Oh, well, we're still talking about it. That's a good thing.
And, TJ, a lot of people all over social media, were saying that the events that unfolded on Monday and Tuesday night, stuff like that happens at Bowman Gray Stadium all the time, is what they were saying. Bowman Gray Stadium, a quarter-mile asphalt, a flat track down in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Is that okay for fans to try to make that connection?
They're going to make the connection. But like Justin was saying, the racing and talking about what Justin said, it's the passion. It's the passion of seeing Mike Stefanik get out and that look on his face that has gone mainstream. That just angry look that he had and then what he ended up saying, that's a passion that goes across every racetrack in America. But it's not I felt was an actual true representation of the on-track action that goes on because of the no calls they made. If NASCAR would have penalized Kyle Larson, I think you would have seen better racing on Tuesday night because, Eric Goodale wouldn't have gone into turn 1 on the final lap and tried to plow his way from third place to first place. Greg Pursley probably would have won the K&N Pro Series race because his car was that good. And then probably after, if he got spun and they ended up putting the driver to the rear, Michael Self probably would have won. But in a way, I absolutely agree with Justin that if fans don't look at this like what is the actual true on-track representation, but the passion is there. How many times have we seen John Donahue or Matt White after they got wrecked at Thunder Road come up and just, I remember nights, John Donahue racing down the front stretch, his helmet strapped to his head and neck restraint device, running after the guy who wrecked him. How much more passion do you get to that? And then we saw the same thing with Mike Stefanik. So I agree that it looks that way, that the passion's there, and this is the actual blood of American short track racing. But to try to connect it to Bowman Gray, what happens there every week, and say this happens at every racetrack in America, it really isn't.
Right, and I agree with you on that. I think that Madhouse, I stopped watching it after 3 weeks when that show was on History Channel or whatever it was, because it just made me mad, because that doesn't happen all the time. And yes, Bowman Gray, that's how they get 20,000 people in the grandstands every week, and what they've got is a great product, and that works for them. That's not necessarily how it works at the other 999 tracks in the country. But the passion is real. It's the same stuff that happens at Bowman Gray. There may not be cops and fistfights and stuff, but it's the same thing. You go to Thunder Road, and I guarantee you, after every late model race, just like you said, Matt White or John Donahue, those guys are hugely passionate about what they do on that short track. And it doesn't matter where it is, Thunder Road, Devil's Bowl, Bear Ridge, go in the pits after the modifieds at Bear Ridge some night. And that's as much a show as the racing itself. And that's not a bad thing at all. And I'm not talking about, guys getting beat to a pulp. I'm saying, teams yelling at each other and how come you hit me over here? And that's a great thing. I wish that there were more fans that could see that up close. My only regret really with this battle thing is that there wasn't a fist fight on TV, because, this is something the guys are working hard for. And when it gets taken away from them, it doesn't feel good.
I mean,
that part of it I really enjoyed.
I mean, we saw how gutted Mike Stefanik looked, and just how he didn't want to be there. He was just sitting there with his, just trying to figure out what had happened. It's sour. I mean, you and I and Ricky were in the press box after the 2011 TD Bank 250 and looked at Nick's suite, and he finished second in the TD Bank 250. But you remember, he finished second in the TD Bank 250, and that look on his face and what he was saying, I wish more fans could have seen that, because you think finishing second, you'd be excited. He was gutted, and that's the same emotion that Mike Stefanik had on Tuesday night.
The same thing the year before. Patrick LaPearl was weeping in victory lane because he didn't win. He was happy that he had such a great finish in the 250, but he was actually crying because he didn't win. He was that close, and it didn't happen.
And
it's the same deal.
And that's the thing. The emotion you saw in Mike Stefanik, and I hope fans that don't really watch the short track racing or go to their short track pick up on that, is that's true emotion. I mean, you hear thousands of fans and through the media members on Twitter that follow NASCAR racing, that follow the National Series, that fans want the emotion of the drivers, and they think they're too corporate. You don't get any more emotion than what you saw Monday night or Tuesday night with Mike Stefanik. How gutted he was and how just downright upset he was that happened. But on the flip side, Steve Park, the emotion he had after returning to victory lane, winning at Daytona, the emotion that drivers have, because it is short track racing, it is grassroots racing. It is the guy you work with on the assembly line floor that, has to live on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches every week so he can buy the tires to go racing, and goes out and wins the race or then loses the race, whatever. That's the guy that does it every single week, and that's the emotion that he wears on his sleeve. And the emotion that I think is going to last is definitely the Mike Stefanik thing, because it is a true representation of the emotion that short track racing carries.
And Justin, I know we were kind of debating about this off the air, but the track's configuration, 0.4 of a mile located on the backstretch of the Daytona International Speedway, were you pleased with the track's configuration when all was said and done?
I was actually in Daytona while they were setting the track up. I was down there for some conferences, and I was actually right there as they were laying out the track, and I thought to myself, here we go, this is going to be a terrible show. I really thought, watching the heat races and the late models on Monday night last week, that it was way better than what I expected. If you had a car that was handling, and if you were patient enough, I mean, you could make a 3-wide lane change here and pick a guy off. I thought it was great racing, and if people were patient, and even at the end of the late model race, it was the racing really was very good, especially for being flat. I mean, flat as a frying pan. You wouldn't think that it was going to be very good racing, but I've seen races up at St. Eustache up in Canada, basically the same configuration, just as flat as the counter in my kitchen, and they throw off some great races up there too. So they say don't judge a book by its cover, and I guess I learned my lesson here.
The only thing that I would say about the track is, you look at the track, and I had the same thing. This is going to be a disaster. And again, if I think the racing was officiated the same way as it was in the heat races throughout the entire event, I think the racing would have been a lot better. I mean, we saw the last 15 laps of that late model race was spectacular. And the back and forth battle between C.E. Falk and Kyle Larson and how they were setting each other up to pivot off the corner and, try to get a run on them down in the turns. I mean, listen, I'm as fan of anyone the side-by-side racing where you're slamming fenders and trying to get up next to someone and without rooting him out of the way, without dumping him out of the way. I think it's not New Smyrna, and I think New Smyrna, would it throw off a better race than I think what the backstretch did? Yes, but it's not the lure of Daytona, and I think working with what you had there, I think it was the best thing they could come up with. It's the best thing they could do. We saw how people reacted after winning at Daytona, and this event probably wouldn't have the same attention it had if it was at New Smyrna. I mean, it's Daytona.
I think you're 100% right.
It's Daytona. I mean, how many, if you had the, Billy Bob's 500 held at, some race, some small unknown track and tried to play it up like the Daytona 500, it wouldn't be, because it's not Daytona. Look how many guys have raced at Daytona. They hold the Rolex 24, the biggest race for the Grand Am Series, the biggest race in NASCAR, the biggest race for a lot of races. They hold the AMA Supercross, one of the biggest Supercross races, the Pro Bike races. It is Daytona, and the win at Daytona, I think, is so much bigger than winning it anywhere else. And that was the draw, that was the allure, and it worked. And they took what they had and tried to make a great situation out of it. I think they did the best they could with what they were dealt with.
Yeah, and I'll go back real briefly on that. Yes, the track was not high banked. It wasn't generally 2 and 3 wide racing. It wasn't, but there was ability to pass. And I think that, like TJ said, most of the racing incidents that happened there, a lot of that was driver problem. And you can definitely point the finger at where was the black flag. And I think that's something that NASCAR may take a look at. I don't know, and I won't speak for them. But they were overall pretty consistent in their calls by not making calls. So that's the way they do things, and it's different than ACT or PASS or MRS or whatever we're used to up here. So be it.
And, guys, this question is for both of you. I guess you can answer this kind of one at a time, but should fans expect a return trip for the Battle at the Beach to Daytona in 2014? Will this event be at the same venue, or could it potentially be at a half-mile racetrack down the road at New Smyrna Speedway?
I don't think that there's any reason to have it unless it's at Daytona. You just can't, like TJ just said, you can't have it at New Smyrna. Yes, New Smyrna is a great track. But it's not Daytona. Nobody wants to, work all winter long so that they can race, at a 5/8 mile that's been open for, 30 years or whatever, and I don't care if it's dirt or asphalt or modifieds or late models or sprint cars or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's Daytona. How do you get any bigger or better than that? Yeah, absolutely.
I can't disagree with anything Justin said. It's Daytona. It's the lure of being in the same track as Jeff Gordon, as Dale Earnhardt. I mean, you just want to race at a track that it took Dale Earnhardt 20 years to win its biggest race. It's the same thing. And New Smyrna has been racing at the World Series for years. And recently they run the same exact cars, almost, same exact modifieds, and they struggle to get 20 cars. It's Daytona. It's winning at Daytona, and it's the lure of Daytona. So, I think the event should come back because it puts a big spotlight on short track racing. The Toyota All-Star Showdown could never touch the spotlight it got. Even leading into the event, it doesn't matter what happened at the event, but you had people in the upper echelons of NASCAR talking about this event, in the upper echelons of the media talking about this event, because it is at Daytona, and I don't think you can get any bigger than racing at Daytona, no matter what you're racing.
If Tom Curley decided to move the ACT Invitational from Loudon to anywhere else, it doesn't even matter. Pick a track. I don't care. What do you think it'd have the same buzz? I don't. The same thing. And I think that if the crowd hadn't responded on Tuesday night to what happened Monday, then there would be some question about whether or not the Battle at the Beach happens again. But, Monday night's crowd was not that great, admittedly. But if you were watching on Speed Channel, or if you saw any of the photos from Tuesday night, that grandstand crowd was 3 times the size, maybe more, for the Modified and Canon series, because everybody was talking about it and everybody had to be there to see that second night. It was, I haven't seen anything like that in short track racing, maybe ever. Maybe 50 years ago that happened. Somebody loses a wheel and flips over right in front of the grandstand and then gets out and fights, back in the post-war era. That's the kind of stuff that drew people to racing. And that's exactly what happened again in 2013 last week.
And guys, this is my closing question for segment 1. Did these 3 races give short track racing in the United States a black eye?
I don't think it did. I think it misrepresented what happens at a lot of short tracks across America? Yes, but it's no different than the darkest days of any event. So the answer is no. It didn't give it a black eye. Did it get sucker punched for a lot of representation? Yes, but people are talking about it, and what appeared. If you would ask me this question directly after it, would I say a black eye? Yes. But then you take a few days to think about it, and you see the response it's gotten. It's probably a golden eye if you would ask me now.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I am a believer in the 3-year plan, that you can't ever judge anything by the first year. It was I wrote about it in the Burlington Free Press and the Vermont Speed. Whether the racing was good or not, everybody's talking about it, and that's only a good thing. I feel like I've said this a few times, and I won't harp on it anymore, but that's the way I feel. I really believe that it was a good thing.
And the one way you can tell if it was a good thing going forward is if next year on Monday and Tuesday night you get more fans. And if there's more fans than there was this year at both events, how's it not a positive thing? Because they're going there because of what happened last year.
He was a member of Matt Kobolek's 2008 NASCAR Camping World East Series championship winning team, and most recently the race director of Connecticut's Waterford Speed Bowl. Now he's the series director of the Valente Modified Racing Series. We talk to Scott Tapley next. This is the Vermont Motorsports Magazine Report. RPM Racing Engines in Georgia, Vermont specializes in all high-performance engines, including racing, stock, drag, bow, and much more, and boasts a complete machine shop with a variety of services available. RPM Racing Engine serves tracks throughout the Northeast and has your Chevrolet race engine. RPM Racing Engines has your Ford racing engine, too, including the S347JR seen on the American-Canadian Tour. RPM Racing Engines is also a dealer in many top brands, including AR Bodies, Bassett Wheels, Sunoco Race Fuels, and VP Racing Fuels. Give Rick and RPM Racing Engines a call at 802-524-7406 and visit their website at rpmengines.vt.com. The Vermont Motorsports Magazine Report. Joining us now on the phone is the new series director for the Valente Modified Racing Series, Scott Tapley. Scott, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm great. How are you guys?
Doing
good.
Doing pretty well.
Very good.
Scott,
and
Scott, let's jump right into this. Yeah. We've been talking about the UNOH Battle at the Beach, and you're in almost a unique position because you were the Waterford Speed Bowl race director last year. And you've moved on to become the Valente Modified Racing Series director. But if you were going to be the Waterford Speed Bowl director again this year, would there be anything you'd say to your drivers that first race in regards to the UNOH Battle of the Beach that says, talks about what happened on Monday and Tuesday?
Well, unfortunately, I think everyone in any form of racing has to address it when they get to their first race because it was such a poor show. I think you have people in all forms of racing that saw it as, shown by NASCAR and is actually being defended by NASCAR in some circles as still being a good show. And when that kind of spin is put on something, it can confuse, especially young drivers. Like I had legends and bandoleros that race weekly with us at the Speed Bowl. If they watch that, it's very unfortunate because, they're going to get the wrong idea of how racing should be.
And Scott, kind of moving forward here, as we mentioned just a moment ago, you are the new series director for the Volante Modified Racing Series. And we were checking out the schedule just a moment ago. 19 races on the 2013 schedule. I'm sure you're excited to take the reins of this new venture.
I am. Yeah, it's exciting on a lot of different levels. One being, having a focus of one division and being able to just try and make that the best series of racing in not only the region but the country. And traveling less. I lived in Maine and traveled to Connecticut every Wednesday and Saturday last year, so it was a lot of travel. And now I'll get a race at home at Oxford. I only live 7 minutes from there, so it'll be good to have that type of less travel.
And I know
I've got a question, Scott, that I'll kind of tie both of these topics together with.
Yep.
Now, in the middle of that 19 race season, that's going to be a long and, grueling deal where everybody's going to have tempers at some point. And there's 11 straight weeks where you guys race.
Yep.
What's going to happen from your perspective as the race director if guys start teeing off on each other lap after lap after lap, like we saw at Daytona?
It just won't happen. I don't have as I said to everyone at the Speed Bowl, and I said to Jack when we met, I just don't do nonsense. And what you saw Monday and Tuesday was just that. When it becomes more about wrecking than racing, that's when you draw the line in the sand as an official. That's your job to do that, to make sure that it's fair for everyone. And that's my job, and I will make sure that that's the case. That when everyone comes through that gate at the beginning of the day, everyone has the same shot to win. And when you lock it, everyone still has the same shot to win. And that's my job to take care of that and to determine intent and things of that nature. And, as tying back into Monday and Tuesday, that's where it all started. Had they penalized Larson on Monday, I think you would have seen completely different races on Tuesday. But they didn't, and they, in a sense, encouraged what they saw on Tuesday.
Well, and I'll expand on that. You've got a lot of the same drivers that will be following, at least on a part-time basis, the Volante Modified Series that were involved in, the bad stuff, the modified race at the battle. Do you anticipate maybe having a little side discussion with them before, or are you going to call them out, or are you just not even going to do anything until something happens?
Again, I don't think it was the racers themselves. Obviously, yes, there's a point where they make the decision to turn the guy in front of them or whatever the case is. But as I was, Travis Barrett is a friend of mine, and I was talking to him. He was down there. And I told him that the guys up front didn't need to wreck each other because they knew that they had to race 149 laps before they needed to wreck each other. The guys in the back knew they needed to start wrecking soon and doing it now because that's what they showed that's how they showed they were going to officiate it. So if I believe, a lot of those guys that were in wrecks on Tuesday night in the modifieds aren't guys that typically do that. I mean, we raced with Steve Park for a full year, and I don't think he got into us one time in the East Series when I was with Matt Kobolek. they provided them a no holds barred event, and they raced to those rules.
Scott, do you think, as an official and officiating it, that obviously you feel you can control that for the drivers, and last year, even though you weren't involved with the series, the modifieds had a couple events like that got out of hand, particularly the first Thompson race in May, and then the Lee race where the 3 leaders got spun out with 10 laps to go. Do you think that there's a way an official can officiate a race beforehand and during that can send a message that this isn't acceptable?
Yeah, I think, you can stand at a driver's meeting and you can preach that you're not going to tolerate, over-aggressive driving or driving with intent to wreck someone. You can say that all day long, but if you do not provide examples, if you do not follow through with penalizing someone, then the dynamic will never change. It'll still be, whatever it was, as far as roughness and things of that nature. But I'm straightforward with everyone in everything that I do, almost to a fault sometimes, maybe too honest. But it's about, I know how much work, I've been on the other side of it. I know how much time, effort, and money goes into everything to have something that isn't, competitive take you out of something that you consider a junk, a garbage move. It hurts, it literally hurts your pride. It makes you drive home mad, makes you work all week mad, it makes you show up to the next race mad. So you've got to take care of those situations from the very start and set precedents.
And do you think that's, is that getting to know your racers too, and walking around and talking with them before an event, during an event, and figuring out, if they're mad, what they're mad at, and dealing with the situations before it one, leaves the track, but 2, if it does leave the track, before the cars hit the track the next time?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's weird in today's world, Twitter and Facebook are they provide such an obvious feeling about a feud. Like, I would have 2 mini stock guys arguing back and forth on Facebook, and I knew Saturday when I got there I'd have to talk to those 2 guys, because I knew, in years prior to social media, it would just be when you're buying your ticket Saturday in line, they'd go at it and they'd jaw or whatever. But now it can be an all-week thing, which can lead to even more tensions when you get to the racetrack. So those type of things, at Waterford, I took care of them that night, and then I also followed up with them with phone calls during the week. And I think we were pretty successful as far as that goes. Car counts went up in my 2 years, and the people that came from Thompson all said that it was because the officiating was, what they thought was, hey, listen, I'm not going to do everything right. There's no doubt about it. I'm going to make mistakes. But if it's the same for everybody and the tolerance for nonsense isn't there, then I think everyone enjoys that as a competitor a little bit more.
And Scott, I know you said that if a decision was made by NASCAR on Monday night, to maybe penalize Larson or strip him of his win, the racing would have probably been much better on Tuesday night, because the message would have been sent, this stuff can't go on. Were you initially expecting NASCAR to make a call as soon as you saw Larson make contact with CE Falk on Monday night?
It was a no-brainer to me. It was literally, I was stunned that they didn't black flag him on TV in the 30 seconds they gave us before they went to Richard Petty, or seeing it on Twitter where he had been DQ'd. I firsthand was part of, in 2009, the showdown when Logano wrecked Sellers and we ended up winning the race. I mean, that was as obvious, if not more, by Larson. He hit him twice. He didn't get him the first time, and he got him the second time. And they took, I heard on my radio that Logano was DQ'd within 30 seconds of that finish. So, I don't understand it. Well, I kind of do understand it. I think if it was the other way around, there would have been a penalty.
You mean?
Do you think that
if Falk had dumped Larson, I absolutely believe there would have been a penalty. Yeah, no doubt about it.
I'm not trying to start a fight here, but Jason Chrisley took to Twitter right after. He's a NASCAR representative, for those who don't know, and he's very heavily involved.
I know Jason.
I know some of our listeners may not. He's very heavily involved in the home track program, and was one of the people that was overseeing that race. And he said, without provocation, that if the roles had been reversed, the same no call would have been made.
Well, and again, I have a pretty decent relationship with Jason, and I understand his job and what he has to do as the media director of that whole deal. But Coleman Presley got black flagged in the heat race. I know that they can pretend that nobody watched those races on the internet, but I did, and he got black flagged for over aggressive driving into, I can't remember who it was. And it was far less intense than what Larson had done. And during the race, you had issues where guys got into each other, but nothing where it showed major intent. I rewatched the race to make sure. So you could have gone either way on any of those calls. But essentially, the most inline incident was Larson into Falk was the same as Presley into, and I can't remember who the car was in the heat race. It was the same thing, and one was a penalty and one was not. So that makes, you can argue that it would have been the same way, but I find it hard to believe when you just showed that it wasn't the same way. So, those are the type of things that always frustrated me when we were, we had some issues in the E Series where we got taken out a couple of times, and it was all right for one and not for the other. And that's when I decided that I wanted to be in this position. It was actually a drive home from Adirondack in 2007 when I told my coworker Glenn Thomas, I said, I just don't want anyone else to have this feeling that I have. Somebody has got to step up and change this. And I don't know if I am that guy. I don't know if I'm doing everything 100% correct, but I know that what I'm doing, I can sleep at night knowing that I did it the same for everyone.
And does that mean you officiate the race the same way in a 10-lap heat race to a 15-lap last chance qualifier to a 112-lap to feature? Your officiating has to be the same all the way through, no matter what.
It has to be, because you have to know the box you're in as a competitor. You can't show up and think that it's going to be called one way or the other. Gene Price Motorsports rented Las Vegas parking lot. They poured all their money and effort into this event. They traveled from California, drove all the way out there, won 2 straight championships, knowing that they were competing under the rules that they have competed under for the last however many years they've been a part of it. Presley dominates the race and gets turned, and it's no big deal. Sorry, enjoy your ride back home. Those are the type of things where you show up for one thing and it's another, and who wants to be a part of that? I think they're going to be hard pressed to find people to compete in that event next year.
And
Scott, is there a way? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Ricky. Is there? I don't want to say a different set of rules, but can you officiate differently based on who the drivers are that you're? Say it's Ted Christopher and I don't know, pick a guy, Woody Pitcat, or Jimmy Blewett, the guys that can handle it, or up north, say Eric Williams and Brian Hoare, guys that are willing to, lean on a guy to get by him,
Well, that's
and
a different story. Yeah. And that's a different story. I believe me, I know there's contact in racing, and as far as the entertainment value, you have to have it. And I'm okay with contact in racing. But again, it's what I told these guys every week was when it becomes more about wrecking the guy than racing him is going to have contact. Wrecking him is intent, and that's where you draw the line. I've black flagged Ted once before for doing it in an SK8R track. I've parked Keith Rocco for doing it. It doesn't matter your skill level. Wrong is wrong.
Now I'll play. I'll go one further with that.
Yep.
How do you explain to a kid like Greg Galding, who is 15 years old, making his first start in a whatever, and he leans on Michael Self and says, well, I saw Kyle Larson do it the other night, and in the instance that a Greg Galding or somebody like that is disqualified for dumping the leader, but Kyle Larson isn't, because Kyle Larson has experience and Kyle Larson can handle it, or whatever the case may be. How do you define the difference between a talented veteran driver like a Ted Christopher or a Brian Hoare, who it's not dirty with them necessarily, that's the way they race, and they know when to press the button and when not to.
Well, it doesn't.
How do you explain that to a young kid?
I guess I don't understand the question, because if you're talking about Greg Galding's situation, he would have been, he didn't win the race, so whatever, tail end of the lead lap or whatever the case is with him. And getting into a guy and wrecking.
I guess what I mean is how do you say that? Okay, you can race Teddy, you can race a guy this way, but Greg Galding you can't because we don't know you yet.
Well, you don't say that. That's what I'm saying. You don't. It has to be the same for everybody. And like I said, it doesn't matter if it was in the back half of the SK field or the front half of the SK field. When you're trying to wreck the guy, when you turn someone around and a yellow comes out, you're going to go to the back. Or if you're trying to wreck him and the yellow doesn't come out, you're going to get black flagged. It has to be the same for everyone, because you can't pick and choose who's good and who isn't for their abilities. They all have to be a car number. They can't be a name.
I mean, and you've had the opportunity to officiate high profile racers. Keith Rocco running for a national championship, a lot of short track national attention. You said you've officiated Ted Christopher, and you feel like that gives you the experience, not so much the experience, but knowing that you can strip the names out of the cars and put the number on it, like you just said.
Yeah, it's always been to me that way, and to be honest with you, I think it all comes from growing up at Oxford, and when Curly took over, he had the same mentality. And I would say that I probably model myself most like him. Obviously, everyone has their opinions that Tom, favors one or the other. But at the end of the day, I think he's the most fair in this area, that he just saw it for what it is. If you bring in $1 million of sponsorship for the series, he doesn't treat you like you can go wreck everyone. You're the same as the guy who brings 2 people to the racetrack and barely makes it there, And that's the way it has to be, because who wants to compete in something when you're losing before you even get there?
And I know, Scott, this upcoming season on the Modified Racing Series, there has been a modification to the plus-minus system that was adopted just a couple of years ago from the American Canadian Tour. For the listeners who are tuning in, can you kind of clear up what's going on with that change?
Well, the reason is twofold. One, it's easier for the fans, and 2, it's easier for our scorer who just didn't have the time to do the plus-minus system, get back and get everything ready for a consi, and then run back up to the booth and get ready to race. Jen Reddy is the best in the business, but at the end of the day, there was just too much on her plate, and it's easier for everyone to understand from a competitor standpoint. You had a lot of guys, and I think you still have it on the ACT Tour too, a lot of guys that still really don't understand the system exactly, and this is just much more straightforward.
Do you think it's going to?
Go ahead, TJ.
Do you think it's going to improve, that qualifying competition a little bit, where guys aren't just racing for a position, but now they have a shot? I mean, your guys are going to a redraw, right?
It's talked about. I don't believe we've solidified that yet. It's one of the things that's holding the rule book out from being printed. But it is being talked about for a redraw. But it's not really. Yeah, you just pull a pill and reorganize the top 6, 8, or whatever the case may be. That's the plan at this point. But nothing's set in stone as far as that goes. And do you feel that, I want to say more fair, but it allows more drivers to know that they can get to a position and know that they do have a shot. If a guy starts on the pole and falls back to second,
he's not starting on the pole. But if a guy starts on the pole, falls back to second, is able to get in that redraw, that he still has a shot at the pole in a way.
Yeah, and I think just the competition of the heats itself will be better, knowing that, if you start up front, you're almost, I don't want to say you're screwed in the plus-minus system, but you know that you're not gonna have the same opportunity that a fast car out back has, and I just think that there's nothing better than the qualifying for the Oxford 250, and it just should be that way, that simple. You finish here, you start here, and if for entertainment purposes, competitive purposes, you do a redraw, then you do a redraw. But I think from top to bottom, it's the best system.
And during this 19-race schedule, I know you guys have an 11-race stretch, almost every weekend from June 21st to August 30th. Do you think that'll have kind of an impact on the eventual series champion?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think anytime you have, even 4 races back to back, I think it stretches the amount of help you can have in the shop, the amount of money you have in the budget, things of that nature. So, and it comes back to having, fair and competitive and as clean as possible races where guys can load them up the same way they unloaded them and head to the next track with minimal work during the week.
And guys, unless you have anything else to add, Scott, we'd like to thank you for joining us on this afternoon's program, and we wish you the best of luck in the upcoming 2013 racing series this summer on the Volante Modified Racing Series, and we wish you the best of luck.
All right, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Have a good day, guys.
Thanks a lot.
You too.
Thanks, Scott.
Coming up next, we'll preview the 2013 Volante Modified Racing Series season. This is the Vermont Motorsports Magazine Report. Goss Dodge Chrysler is the place to find your new or used car, including the 2013 Dodge Caravan, the 2013 Dodge Dart, or the Manzarek, the 2013 Ram. Goss Dodge Chrysler has hundreds of vehicles ready for you to test drive today at their dealership on Shelburne Road in Burlington, Vermont. Goss Dodge Chrysler has been #1 in sales in New England for 2 years running and is ready to help you purchase a new Dodge, Chrysler, or used car. Visit their website at gosscars.com. Welcome back to the Vermont Motorsports Magazine Report. We were just joined by new Volante Modified Racing Series race director Scott Tapley, and we'll take a look at their 10th season. The schedule opens up April 6th and 7th at Waterford Speed Bowl down in Waterford, Connecticut. For Budweiser Blast-Off Weekend, they have a 100-lap lid lifter, 3 events at Stafford, 3 events at Thompson down there in Connecticut, and the 19-race schedule concludes with the World Series at Thompson International Speedway October 19th. TJ, what really stands out on the schedule? Of course, we mentioned the number of events. 19, is that too many?
No, it separates the men from the boys. And what stands out is that 11-race stretch that they have from June 21st to August 30th. And we talked about it with Scott Tapley. That is going to determine a champion, I think. I feel that stretch of races is going to be a huge grind to any race team. It doesn't matter if you're the team that just barely gets to the track or you're the well-funded team. That's a grind, no matter who you are. That 11-race stretch is whoever can get through that 11-race stretch the best is going to be is going to probably be the champion. But and I don't think 19 races is too many. These are guys that if there's a race going on that they can afford, I mean, they're gonna be there. A lot of these guys, that's how a lot of these guys race. And I think 19 races is a great showcase for a series that has built itself in 10 years from nothing to what it is now. And they're really cementing their place as trying to become the premier modified racing series in the Northeast.
And Justin, we know that in 2013 there will be, in fact, a new series champion. 2012 series champion John McKennedy has committed to a full-time ride in the International Super Modified Association race schedule, and will only be running select event and Art Berry's Spasco ride on the Valente Modified Racing Series. Who are some of the potential contenders that could step up and try to grab the series championship this summer?
Well, you've got a pretty good roster there. I think that, it's hard to look past Les Hinckley, Chris Pastriak. Those are guys that have been there, and Pastriak's won 3 titles with that series. So he's definitely a guy that you can't forget about at any point. Les Hinckley's been knocking on the door ever since the series was founded. And by the way, give a call to Jack Bateman and his team. 10 years. There were a lot of skeptics back in 2004 that were wondering if this thing was going to fall on its face, and it clearly hasn't. So congratulations to them. But I think Rob Goodenough is always a guy that people forget about. You've got, you never know what Kirk Alexander and Dwight Jarvis are going to do if they show up and run a full season, or if they don't. Even when they just show up, they're a threat to win. Keith Rocco is in the same boat. There's a lot of guys coming up through in the last few years. Timmy Jordan, you got a couple of good guys moving up even. Rob Riccardi, who was the Pro 4 modified champion, and Norm Wren, who spent time there. And you get Todd Patnote, who wins in anything that he's driven. Larry Barnett, who was a driver at Thompson in the street stocks there. There's a lot of guys that are coming from all over the place. I mean, even Etienne Cleach, who runs the ACT Castrol Series, they've got a car. They're going to be coming out of Valley Junction, Quebec, up by Autodrome Chaudière. So, those guys are they're really a wild card. You get a Jim Boniface in there every now and then. You get a Richard Savory. Max Zackham is a kid who's shown some potential. Steve Massey, I mean, how do you ignore him? And then Tommy Barrett. I mean, they're two of the most controversial drivers that have been in New England racing in any series over the last few years. And they're young, they're fast, they're talented. They need to be reeled in a little bit, and I think that they're a lot. They're really exciting guys to watch. So it's wide open. It should be a really good year for the Valente Modifieds.
One guy I think we should also mention as a newcomer is Dylan Kopeck. Ran SK Lights at Stafford, was in a contention to win a championship till the very end, and I mean he's making the jump right to the Valente Modified Racing Series, and I think he's a kid that in a year or two maybe he can pull something off with a season that could be potentially wide open for a championship. But I think he's going to be there for a couple of years if he stays and contending for championships for a couple more years.
And Jacob Dorr is another guy that we didn't mention. He just won the championship at Star, and he's been successful on the Valente Tour as well. So if he commits to a full season, he's going to be right up there in the mix as well. Dylan Kopeck, that's a great call. That's right where Tommy Barrett came from, and you've seen what Tommy Barrett's done over the last couple of years there. So a lot of good new talent coming up through.
And guys, going back to the schedule, Oxford Plains Speedway and Beech Ridge Motor Speedway back in the 2013 circuit. The Valente Modified Racing Series will go to the 3/8 of a mile Oxford track July 20th and return to Beech Ridge on August 3rd. TJ, how does this really diversify the schedule?
I mean, I was heartbroken last year when they didn't return to Oxford on the Saturday of the 250. Because I think it puts them right in the limelight. But to diversify, I mean, there isn't a track that they run on like Oxford or Beech Ridge, and with a very Connecticut-based, a lot of very Connecticut-based teams. I mean, it puts them in front of new fans that may not really follow the tour, but it gets their product and their racing in front of new fans and fans that only see them once or twice a year. But I mean, that's all it takes. If you put them in front of a fan once or twice and they fall in love with the series, they're going to follow, on the internet, follow from afar, and maybe go to an additional race. So I think anything that can get your series in front of more fans and different fans, I think is great. I mean, yes, you're keeping with the traditional Connecticut tracks, Waterford, Thompson, Connecticut, or Stafford, excuse me. but you're also branching out. And I mean, I love the addition of the main races, and they're some of the raciest races they have. You know, and they pull off some of probably the most unsuspecting race winners there are. I mean, you know, in 2011, the last time they were in Maine, we saw Joe Doucette and Mike Holdridge claim their first victories on the Valente Modified Racing Series. Who saw that coming? So it brings up an aspect of unpredictability, and I think anytime you can have unpredictability is great.
And Justin, you know, I know that Rowan Pennick may not return to the Valente Modified Racing Series in 2013. His family-owned team does a lot of events with the NASCAR Wheel and Modified Tour. Could this potential? I know Rowan Pennick has a big following, and he's been a contender, you know, every year with the tour. I guess we could call him a controversial driver. He's always there at the end. He's always a threat to grab a checkered flag every time they have a race. You know, could this potentially hurt the tour in terms of losing fans, or what could happen with that this summer?
No, it's not going to, you know, would you love to have Rowan Pennick there to mix things up? Sure. I don't think it'll hurt the team, hurt the tour. Gary Casella has a pretty good habit of selecting talented racers to drive that 25 car, and you know, whoever he throws in that car is going to do a fine job for him. You know, and that's not to say that, you know, the tour doesn't need Rowan Pennick, because, you know, he does certainly bring an element of fun to the Valente series, but they'll be fine without him. You know, and that's again, that's not a knock on Rowan or anything. He's a great driver and is always fun to watch, but you know, nobody's bigger than the show, I guess, is the point. And yeah, I mean, there's going to be somebody to step in his place. You know, Tommy Barrett or Steve Massey that we just mentioned. You know, they're every bit as controversial as Rowan Pennick wants to be. Or, you know, you take a Doug Coby who can step into a, you know, really any car that he gets in, you know, even if it's once a year, and be right up there and in the mix. And you know, for every Rowan Pennick, there's 5 more guys that can that are happy to at least take a shot at filling his shoes. So, no, I don't think it's a big loss for the series. But he certainly does make things exciting. And
we don't know who Gary Casella is going to put in that car. I mean, he could put someone just as exciting or even more exciting than Rowan Pennick in that car. And Rowan might decide to come back and run the full series. It's an element of we don't know yet, but whoever, like Justin said, whoever Gary Casella picks to choose in that car, that number 25 is going to be up front, where it has been for a lot of years.
And TJ, you know, Chris Pastriak and Les Hinckley, they didn't have seasons that they're capable of executing. I know last year they kind of had an off year, so to speak. Can those two guys, can they make a rebound in 2013?
I don't see any reason why they can't. Chris Pastriak, I mean, he's won 2 championships with them, with the Valente Modified Racing Series. You know, and he went almost wire to wire in 2011 with the series. Didn't finish outside the top 10 in 2011. And then it seemed like last year he was in contention to win the Blast-Off last year, and had a freak failure that the spoiler fell down on the car. Something you never expect to happen, and that's just the way their season went. It seemed just not running where they should be. And sometimes that, if you start out of the gate with a bad issue, it can affect the team a little bit. I mean, I don't want to speak that's what happened, but it could happen. But there's no reason why Chris Pastriak shouldn't be back fighting for a championship in 2013. But then you look at Les Hinckley, and Les Hinckley, I thought was in the driver's seat to win a championship last year. I mean, he was good. You know, he appeared to be good everywhere he went. They had the freak thing that happened at Waterford when they had a power steering pump issue, and then their car got absolutely destroyed at Thompson. They came back, and then it happened again, and it kind of sidelined them for a couple of weeks. But they're a team that you expect to be at the front, and when they're there, I mean, they're going to win. They're going to be expected to win. And Les Hinckley, you know, 2 years ago, fighting for that championship with Chris Pastriak, coming right down to the final race. And there's no reason to think that either Chris Pastriak or Les Hinckley wouldn't be in that title hunt heading down to Thompson.
And of course, as I mentioned earlier, this is the Series 10th season. The inaugural year was back in 2004. Kirk Alexander claimed that Series championship. Justin, did you expect the Valente Modified Racing Series to, last as long as it has?
I wouldn't say that I was skeptical of it, but I was wondering how strong it would be. And it's the same thing with the Pro All-Star Series, with the Super Late models and Tom Mayberry, with all the work he's done. You always expect something to, have some hiccups, and don't get me wrong, those two series have certainly had their hiccups, but they've survived them no problem. I've actually been kind of hanging around the Valente series since the beginning, and I'm happy to say that I've watched it grow, and it got a little long in the tooth there with Kirk Alexander winning 10 or 11 races every year for the first 3 or 4 years. But, that doesn't mean that the racing wasn't very good, because it was extremely good. And it has continued to be so. And that tour has developed some drivers that have really turned into, a big deal up here. That's something to be proud of. I don't know that I can ever predict the future. I don't know, about anything. I wouldn't have expected the sprint cars in New England to take off as well as they have. Look at where they were 2 years ago, with 8 or 9 cars or whatever, and now they've got 25. So whatever they're doing something right. And Jack Bateman certainly found a formula. I think that the addition of Scott Tapley is going to help in a big way. He carries a lot of pretty good credentials behind him, and has a lot of experience in with a lot of different kinds of race cars and in different situations, and he can see it from several different viewpoints. And John Hoyt was a good buddy of mine, and he was instrumental on the Valente series. And after he passed away a couple of years ago, there's kind of been a little bit of a void there. People looking for the right person to fill his shoes, and I think they might have found it with Scott Tapley. He's got a good head on his shoulders, and that'll be fine for the series. I really believe that. It's a strong tour. They've been billing themselves as New England's premier modified series for a little while, and a few years. And when you take on, when you give yourself that name, and realize that you're going head to head with the NASCAR Wheel and Modified Tour, which is, NASCAR's first division that they ever started back in 1948. You're biting off a pretty big, piece of the loaf there, but they're still chewing, and they're doing a good job. I really think that, and it doesn't matter that they don't have a race at Loudon or, a super speedway somewhere, or have this, $5 million to win race. They've got, if you want to compare apples to apples, they've got a bigger schedule, a more diverse schedule, and they pull from everywhere in terms of talent, than the Wheel and Modified Tour. And that's not a knock against the NASCAR Tour at all, but they've got all the grassroots guys, the lower budget teams, and they also pull in the Ted Christophers and the Keith Roccos and the Mike Stefaniks and Todd Zegedy and big established name drivers. That's pretty impressive for what is, by all accounts, a shoestring low budget tour that they kind of make it up as they go along, and it works.
I agree with Justin. The series has definitely grown. I think more than a lot of the skeptics ever thought it would be. And then they're drawing NASCAR Wheel and Modified Tour teams on occasion. Ted Christopher races a handful of races. Last year's champion Doug Coby races a handful of races with the Valente Modifieds, and they're successful. And they're not always they don't always win, which shows the talent that both series offers is very equal. But something that I think the Valente Modified series offers that NASCAR doesn't is that connection to the grassroots racer. Rob Goodenough has his own shop, his own garage, and guys that work again Monday through Friday. It's something that you never feel that they're bigger than what they are. And I think Scott Tapley's influence this season is only going to help that, and it's only going to make the series bigger, and is only going to keep growing the series. I think Scott Tapley is a missing piece that they haven't had since John Hoyt's passing, a steadying influence, and he's going to be, I think, a great addition to the Volante Modified Racing Series this year. I know he's got some great ideas, and I mean, it sounded it when we talked to him just earlier. So it's going to be a great series for him, a great 10th year, and I know I'm excited about everything, but it's something I think every fan should be excited about because it's going to be a great 10th year for him.
Well, that wraps up this edition of the Vermont Motorsports Magazine Report. We'd like to thank you for listening to our program. For TJ Ingerson and Justin St. Louis, I'm Ricky St. Clair.